Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 46th AGM for IFCCI. The topic for discussion this evening is India's emergence as a global manufacturing and supply chain hub. I'm extremely excited to present my eminent co-panelists. Starting on my left, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatia, who is the EVP and Head of New Economy Group Financial Sponsors and Multinationals Coverage within Axis Bank. He is responsible for business strategy, origination and client satisfaction for these categories of clients. To his left, Mr. Shreeram Sethuraman, Head Transaction Banking Services, BNP Paribas, India. Shreeram is responsible for the overall performance of transaction banking and is spearheading the bank's efforts in leveraging technology for the benefit of clients. To his left, Mr. Atit Mahajan, Managing Director for CMA CGM India. Mr. Mahajan has extensive industry experience in the Indian shipping and logistics sectors. The group has 302 depots and warehouses to support its customers with a seamless storage facility. To his left, we have Mr. Jayesh Gadekar. Jayesh is a seasoned professional in the insurance industry, currently holding the position of Chief Strategy Officer and Head of Employee Benefits at the J.B.Boda Group. To his left, Ipsita Das, Managing Director, Moët Hennessy, India. Ipsita is the Managing Director for India and 5 South Asian countries. She is the Vice President of Indo-French Chamber of Commerce and Industry as well. Can I please request everyone to put their phones on silent? Thank you. To Ipsita's left, we have Mr. Ashish Saraf, Vice President and Country Director for India at Thales. In his role, he leads all of Thales' business in India, including defense, aerospace, digital identity and security. He is responsible for the strategic growth of Thales in the country. Welcome all of you, and it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm going to get started with Shreeram. Shreeram, a lot has been said in recent times about India developing as a manufacturing hub. What has BNP's experience been in terms of Europe's sentiments towards manufacturing in India? Has there been a palpable change in the last few years?
Thank you, Pritha. And, of course, we are Europe's, the largest European bank in Europe, but not just Europe. I think, across the other regions as well, we have a very large client presence. And I can tell you that in meeting the C-suite of, our clients who are already present, most of them have an ambition to at least double their business in India by 2030. So there is a lot of focus on India as a growth market, and not just the clients who are already present in India, but also people who are potentially looking at India, to enter. So if you look across the globe, and some of this was addressed, in the earlier remarks, about growth, India is one of the very few countries which provides, a sustained growth, I would say, over the next 10 to 15 years when most global companies look at India. Now, if I come specifically to manufacturing, I think, and the theme of the topic, we can break it into 2 parts. One is, manufacturing for the domestic market, and then India as a manufacturing hub for the world. And it's a little difficult to generalize, across manufacturing, which is a very diverse, industry across several segments. But if you look at the India mass market, it's generally quality, at an aggressive price point, which is a little lower margin than what, some of our global clients are used to elsewhere in the world. So it's a little bit of an attitude change in terms of, playing the India market, but we're increasingly seeing more and more people, committing to large investments over here. And as they make these large investments, definitely, India will, given the geopolitical situation and, the diversification in manufacturing, we will become a supply chain hub for the world. So to sum up, I'd say that there's a lot of renewed focus and interest on India. I think we've been at this inflection point maybe 2 or 3 times in the last decade. This time it feels a lot more positive that we will actually seize, this opportunity and hopefully do with manufacturing what we've done with services very successfully.
Okay, thank you. Sanjeev, is your experience similar on the ground here in India, or do you see things differently from Shreeram?
No, absolutely. I think I'll probably bring some other perspectives to the table. We as a large Indian bank, we get to see the plans of not just very large multinationals coming into India, but also the ecosystem of smaller and medium-sized multinationals, which typically is the vendor base for a lot of these large manufacturing MNCs. They also coming into the country and showing a very large interest, right? So the number of inquiries have definitely gone up. I think if you were to kind of crystallize the reasons behind why this trend is kind of gaining momentum, I think there are 4 or 5 things which come to mind. One is geopolitics. I think in the last few years, India's track record as a global citizen, as a rule-based functioning democracy is really attracting attention versus what has been happening in some of the other large countries. If you, for example, take an example, the Koreans have had a lot of difficulty in China. And look at what they have created in India. Samsung has one of the largest mobile manufacturing facilities in Noida. They have one of the largest appliance factories in Chennai, right? And with them, they have pulled in their entire ecosystem, right? So I think similarly, Ashish is here from Thales, and I'm sure he's going to speak about the developments which are happening in the defense sector, and all of that. What's happening? Just because the political relationship between India and France has just gone to a different level, you're seeing an increased interest on not only on the defense side, in renewables, in infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So I think that is one part. The other part, again, there was a point made in the earlier conversation about the large population and talent in the country. What I also want to remind this audience is that out of the 1 billion plus population that this country has, there's a sliver of population of, let's say, 100 million, the top tier of this population, 100 million individuals in this country having a per capita income of close to $10,000 plus. And that's a huge consuming class, right? I mean, that 100 million is probably 50% of Indonesia's population or 1/3 of Brazil's population. And that provides an additional leg up. An MNC can use India not just as a supply chain hub, to supply to other markets in India, but a very large captive consumption market in India, and which then leads to economies of scale. So when multinationals are coming into India, they're not just looking at India as a hub for the remaining markets in the country, but also India as a very big market. And finally, I'll just spend some time in terms of what MNCs are seeing the government doing as enabling factors. To support large-scale manufacturing, you need talent and you need skilled manpower. So the government has been running a Skill India program. Not only that, the number of IITs have probably tripled. The number of IIMs have tripled, so that the government has been very focused on higher education to produce that skilled manpower that is required to take manufacturing in this country to the next level. The new education policy has come out and so on and so forth. The quality of the physical infrastructure. We have new expressways coming up. For example, the Bombay-Delhi expressway is on its way. We have a bullet train coming up. The dedicated freight corridors have come up. And many of the multinationals are participating in that. For example, Dubai Ports has been a very large investor of port terminals, and as a very large project finance provider in the country, we see a lot of these conversations happening at very close quarters. So a confluence of all of these factors, and finally on the payment side, again, I think our previous speaker spoke about UPI, but the regulator has also invested in creating a world-class B2B payments platform, real-time gross settlements, Bharat Bill payment system, national clearinghouse, and all of that. So that, a very transparent, functioning payments platform gives a lot of confidence to multinationals in terms of managing business in a large country like India, which is practically a continent, right? So we are we are seeing a lot of conversations, a lot of inquiries, and very, very excited about the future of multinationals in the country.
Yes, of course. I mean, we're not called a subcontinent for nothing. So,
Yeah.
yes, taking that piece forward and your comments on the geopolitical situation, and I'd like to bring you here in, Jayesh. Do you have any comments on how the geopolitical situation is affecting manufacturing, and of course also give your perspective on insurance and reinsurance, and how that plays into the entire manufacturing piece as well?
Yeah, so thanks. I completely agree with both, both of them on, and in fact, what has been said generally on the dais today about India's opportunity on the manufacturing platform. We have a small window, and we, in a way, leapfrogged it to in the early 2000s to move directly to the ITS services, which is sort of boomed. But from a manufacturing hub or a supply chain perspective, I think the opportunity that we have right now is tremendous. That is something which is going to catapult us from a global economy point of view. Coming back from to the insurance point of view, I think insurance is now playing an important part in the overall supply chain and the geopolitical risks, right from the ESG point of view to managing risks at various supply chain levels. So, for example, at reinsurance and insurance platforms, what we are trying to do as an industry is evolve with the risk. The risk has become quite dynamic these days, and what the insurance industry is doing is basically building risk, like for example the parametrics insurance, which is basically to do with the climate change, or factoring some levels of the geopolitical risk within managing the risk. So from an insurance point of view, it is just transferring of the risk, but on a broader perspective is basically how we are going to connect with your partner to sort of have a roadmap to manage the risks. So that's what, from an insurance point of view.
Thank you, Jayesh. And Atit, you're extremely close, obviously, to the supply chain space, given the logistics sector. How do you think the supply chain has evolved over the last few years, especially with the issues that the supply chain was having during the pandemic? And if you can give us some insight into how that has changed from the pre-pandemic to the post-pandemic, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks. So basically, if you look at what happened in pandemic, prior to pandemic also, there was an understanding where people had understood that there is too much of concentration of manufacturing which is happening in China, and the geographical concentration risks were very high. So if you remember, the China plus one is something which is a pre-pandemic concept, which actually accelerated because people did realize the issues or the risks which were there due to the geographical concentration of production which was happening in China. So we do see, though that term was coined some years ago, that is being used in common parlance quite now, and that in itself tells us that how much everybody is looking at diversifying their supply chain. Having said that, what we have to also understand is this geographical concentration, when that had happened, the alternative to that will not be another geographical concentration happening in another country. So from a China plus one point of view, we will be one of the options, not the only option. On this specifically, I would like to tell you that the first wave of China plus one which happened is actually the Chinese companies itself going and investing outside China, and the first wave actually has gone to Vietnam, Mexico, Southeast Asian countries, because if you remember, in May 2020 we had this border issues with China, so we have restricted Chinese companies coming here. But does that mean that we face challenges? No. The fact that our market is so strong, 1.4 billion people, in the next 1 decade, our middle class becoming double than what it is today. People do want access to India's market, and one of the things which you see our government is pushing, that there are two or three things which they are pushing. So first of all, digital infrastructure. We talk about digital infrastructure, but the physical infrastructure which has been upgraded in the last 10 years. Just to give you a comparison, the rail and road infrastructure was developed within the last 1 decade is equal to what happened prior to 45 years prior to that. So that's the scale of physical infrastructure which has been upgraded. Then you had pre-pandemic the GST laws changing, so supply chain from a warehousing point of view became more more efficient. So the fact is, then we have the PLI schemes which the government has come up with, which PLI is production link incentives, which basically incentivizes any additional capacity which you put in India. So that is one of the things which the government is doing. And then there is an active interest of government. We have a lot of clients which we have talked to, where the government is actually approaching the manufacturers and asking them about how they can source more out of India and how the government can help them doing that. So all this focus of the government is also tells us that the government is really wanting more manufacturing happening out of India. Now there are two aspects here, and because we are talking about supply chain, the infrastructure which is getting upgraded within India on the railroad side is fantastic, and the amount of capacity which is getting built is huge. So from a point of view of having the domestic market addressed to this infrastructure is not a problem for us. What we have observed is becoming the manufacturing hub of the world, what we will require is the port infrastructure, which has to be substantially upgraded. So today if you look at China, just let us take an example of China. China is 10 times us. So even if there is a 10% shift of Chinese manufacturing to India, our market is going to go 100%. So that's the scale which we are talking about. Do we have the port infrastructure today? If that 10% shift happens in the next couple of years, there's a doubt on that. So from a point of view of we becoming the manufacturing hub, there is a lot to be done on the port infrastructure side. But from the internal infrastructure, it is quite strongly done. So that is one red flag which we have to keep in mind, and that is something which we as the logistics players have been bringing it up in front of the government, because these infrastructures take a lot of time. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. So that is one thing which we need to take in mind. But from a point of view of whether manufacturing is going to increase in India, what we have to understand is it's going to happen more first with a priority for the local market, and the secondary aim will be to export out of India.
Okay. Thank you. Now, apart from the physical infrastructure, Ashish, there's been a lot of push, as Atit was saying, also on the digital side. We're seeing so many developments. There's the Digi-Yatri program. There's the defense sector. There's the aerospace sector that's being opened up for foreign direct investment. There have been a lot of regulatory changes, and they're still developing as we speak. What do you think the future is for that piece?
So I will speak about the aerospace, defense and the space sector, right? Just a few statistics. So the airlines in India today, they already had a backlog of close to 400 airplanes, and we ordered 900 more, right? So if we really look at starting today, there's going to be more than one airplane, like it's more like 1.6 airplane per week inducted into India for the next 14 years, right? And so there's a modernization of 200 airports that's been launched by Government of India. And talking about digital adoption, and we all see, some of you have flown recently, the deployment of Digi-Yatra, which is one of the key initiatives in terms of travel, where your face is your boarding pass. the amount of digital transactions have quadrupled. They went from 23 billion to close to 100 billion in the last 4 years, and I think Sanjeev spoke about it. In the defense side, the Make in India and de-risking our defense equipment from Russia, these two narratives that are being adopted by government of India has completely changed the face of defense industry today in terms of supply chain, manufacturing, design, engineering, I mean, you name it, right? Today, no contract has been awarded as a global buy from the Ministry of Defense, except for G2Gs like Rafale, which also come in with a heavy Make in India content. But the rest of them, they are all Make in India. What that has done is there's actually forced OEMs like us to actually come in, set up manufacturing units and develop very strong supply chain, not only for domestic consumption but for export as well. So today, just an example, we manufacture in India the electronic warfare suite, self-protection suite and the AESA radar for the Rafale, not only for Indian consumption but also for worldwide consumption. And this is only going to increase in terms of content. On the aerospace side, the supply chains in India, which were previously restricted to mechanical components, now have moved on and graduated to safety critical components, and not only safety critical components, they have graduated to something called MCAs, major component assemblies. So we started with part manufacturing, we went to components, then we went to assembly, and now we went to MCAs, major component assemblies, where the flap track beams of the airplane, one of the most safety critical component that essentially, you know, lifts the airplane or brings it down, gets made here in India for pretty much every single airplane that flies, at least for Airbus, for example. Avionics, mission critical avionics in the cockpit, they get made in India with a supply chain that is incredibly strong, not only for, again, it's for global consumption. The third thing that's happening is space. I think we are opening up the space segment like never before. On the avionics side and the aircraft side, obviously with so many planes, I mean, there will be thousands of airplanes, you know, by 2035 in this country. And the follow-on segments, obviously with maintenance, repair overall, because the taxation has been changed. So we ourselves are now, you might have heard, investing in MRO facilities that will actually be not only for domestic consumption, but will cater to the region. And finally, space. So we were previously only relying on satellites that are not launched by India and kind of buying space onto those satellites to get video analytics or, you know, space surveillance data and images and image analytics and so on, are now graduating to design, develop and launch our own satellites. I mean, the Cartosats that we had were basically, you know, a 1+ ton satellite that was giving us a revisit time frame of once in 4 days for image surveillance. We are now looking at 150 kilogram satellites, that a constellation that will go around and probably give us an image analytics of a revisit time of 6 times a day. And all this is happening here. So in terms of supply chain, there's a complete evolution that effectively went from part manufacturing to, you know, small assemblies and motherboards, etc., and power units, to components and major components, and now actually going towards, you know, manufacturing of complete products that are not only used here but are being exported. So in the A and D and S, so aerospace, defense and space segment, we are seeing a complete transformation and evolution of Indian manufacturing industry and the supply chain that effectively benefits, you know, OEMs like us for the country and then for the world as well.
Thank you. And Ipsita, sorry to keep you waiting right till the end, but you come from a very different industry, the luxury industry. Where do you think India stands in terms of manufacturing and supply chain for the luxury industry?
Thank you for the question, Pritha. It's difficult to follow space, but we'll land back on Earth, and I'll speak about luxury. And I'm going to take a cue from Sanjeev, where he spoke about, the 100 million people. Well, in luxury, we are not talking about 100 million people. We are talking about probably just 10 million people in India today. But most times we think that, in India, it's a matter of scale and we are producing for the masses. What we do not look at very often is that India is a story of two Indias, not just an India of the averages. And if you look at the luxury industry in India, before I get into the supply story of it, the Indian luxury industry is going to go by 3.5x by 2030. If you look at the number of UHNIs in India, they have grown by 11 times in the last 1 decade. India is the third highest when it comes to number of billionaires around the world, and there are more than 1 million millionaires here. So, leaving the numbers aside, clearly India is a very, very attractive market for all the global luxury brands, and we see them coming to India today, not just to enter India as a market, but expand at scale as well. And a couple of ways we see that happening, besides of obviously opening new stores, is look at the number of Indian faces that you see as global ambassadors for luxury brands. Talk about Priyanka Chopra, talk about Alia Bhatt, talk about Deepika Padukone. Not just that. You look at brands that are making India exclusive products today. LV launched a shoe line, a footwear line, just for Indian weddings. Bulgari launched a Mangal Sutra just for Indian women. And very lately, Frank Miller launched a very exclusive edition of 150 watches on the 75th year of India's independence with the India map on the back of the case. Right? So we see the consumption is happening here and the companies are coming here to make use of the opportunity. Now jumping onto the supply side of it. Well, what we don't all know is that Indian craftsmanship is a very prominent backbone of global luxury today. The Dior show back in March was a trailer of that. But very little is known about the multiple ateliers that exist in India today that are actually producing and crafting what goes behind luxury globally. Of course, the sourcing norms did not push them to declare India as the place it was made in, but now it's more and more companies are getting to saying that this is made in India. Of course, there are the bigger prominent names like the Apple or the Mercedes, and if I may unapologetically put in Chanel, we bring in a global product and we proudly make it in India. So the journey has started when it comes to supplying luxury products in India, but I think we really need to own it up and really talk about how proudly we can produce luxury products in India. Thank you, Pritha.
Thank you, Ipsita. So I think just to sum up the conversation, because we're, I believe, almost out of time, the government has done a significant amount in the last decade to prioritize manufacturing. They've addressed security concerns, they've stabilized supply chains, taken steps to promote manufacturing that include ease of doing business in India norms, liberalizing FDI. There have been the PLI schemes, as Atit mentioned. Obviously that has had impact, and there are now tech manufacturers who want to set up shop in India, and that's a great sign. So from a timing perspective, I don't think we could have had a better time to have this conversation. So thank you everyone for joining in. Are we on the brink of seeing manufacturing and supply boost in India? We'll just have to wait and watch, but things certainly look extremely bright. Thank you everyone for joining me on this panel.